Welcome to Season 9 of The Sonic Truth, brought to you by Veritonic in partnership with AW360. This season, we're diving into connected TV, the fastest growing force reshaping advertising and marketing today. Because right now, the brands that win aren't the ones shouting the loudest. They're the ones that understand what truly moves audiences and can prove it. And we're bringing in the people driving the biggest shifts in CTV, advertising, and marketing. The leaders, the innovators, and the voices redefining how impact gets made. Let's get into the conversation.
Welcome to the Sonic Truth podcast. Today we have Alex Collmer, the founder and CEO of VidMob. It's going to be an exciting conversation around AI, creative measurement, a lot of different things in the TV and CTV world. What's really exciting is the different ways that VidMob and Alex are pioneering AI measurement and creative measurement. So Alex, welcome to the Sonic Truth.
Scott, thanks for having me. I was really excited when you reached out.
Awesome. No, us as well. I think the space is a lot of fun right now. It's one of the reasons that for this season, we're focusing on CTV. And I think there's a really interesting period of innovation happening where you have a lot of AI-driven technology. So people are developing things really quickly. And media is becoming more disposable. Cost to create it's going down. And that creates usually, in some ways, the Wild West, but also a lot of opportunities to innovate and a lot of ways to drive value for advertisers, which we want to hear you tell us more about today. So before we get to that, though, I think it's great. You know, we've done a lot of audio over the Sonic Truth for a lot of seasons. People may not know who you are, and it'd be really cool to hear your story and maybe just how you got to VidMob, why you started the business, and just kind of your backstory.
Sure. Yeah, no, I'll give the abbreviated version so we can get into the fun stuff. So, VidMob is an 11-year-old company. And as I'm sure would be the case with literally every 11-year-old technology company, it's evolved in some ways a great deal from the start. And in other ways, it's probably almost exactly the same as the beginning. So where we started was around a recognition that the web was transitioning from primarily text and images to video. And that was going to put a lot of what we thought of at the time as like creative friction, kind of on all marketers to perform, and that creative really mattered. Creative quality has a direct through line to performance, and if we could help people make better, more performant content, then their businesses would drive better results. So the way we solved that in the beginning was with a marketplace. So essentially, the core thesis was people are good at getting raw media, whether that's through iPhones, GoPros, et cetera, or they have agencies making TVCs, but they don't really know how to then make that content work on Facebook, on TikTok, on Snap, et cetera. So we launched that business. Turned out it was a correct thesis. Business scaled fairly rapidly. We ended up partnering with Meta and Snap and TikTok and Amazon and Google and everyone, and that sort of led to basically the beginnings of kind of what VidMob is today, where as we grew, we started building workflow software to connect, basically drive the creative process, and the end of that was building distribution points so we could then distribute the created content to the ad managers at Meta, at Amazon, et cetera. And once we connected those pipes up, we started getting performance information back at the creative level. And so this was around 2017, and it was like just at the time that what we now call AI was starting to kind of come online with computer vision models and things like that. And we had this sort of core insight, which was like, all right, well, like people know which ads work, and they know generally kind of how well they're working, but they don't really have any information as to why. And so if we could help kind of close that gap and provide sort of like creative insights, then we could basically really impact this huge part of the performance mix, which is just a black box. Like every marketer I've ever talked to has always said creative is somewhere between 50 and 70% of results. And then you have like the entire ad tech universe that's focused on the 30%. And so we were like, all right, this is interesting. And so we basically started building ways to take raw creative ad by ad and build a bunch of different models to start deciphering and unpacking everything that's happening creatively inside that ad. So like frame by frame, like, where and when are messages and what kind of messaging is it? And how are logos and other brand elements being used, and what's the pacing and narrative style, and building models to get to like total understanding of creativity, and then compare those with all of the behaviors that marketers care about, so you can get to what we would now think of as like creative analytics and creative data. So, our view was at the time, this is going to be a really interesting business. And so we, basically reoriented the whole business around that sort of, building sort of creative intelligence. And as AI started to become more and more, prominent in recent years, I think it just accelerated things where we're like, okay, hey, this is actually, chapter 2 here. Data is going to be really important as an input into whatever AI tooling people are using. Let's really nail down this. And that's sort of where we sit today.
Interesting. And that stat, like, creative is 50% of, I think in my life, I've used that stat. It's ridiculous how little emphasis the creative gets. I've seen it as high as 70, sometimes 40, sometimes 50. It's like, but creative matters way more than people, whatever it is, it matters way more than people give it credit for.
Yeah, I mean, let me give you like a couple of even crazier things. And you know this from your sort of measurement background. But like every company we work with makes all sorts of very important business decisions based on their MMM results and everything. For the most part, those MMM models have zero factor for creative quality. That's one. So then you think about like, all right, like every impression on the internet, like every impression has ML models that are parsing through countless signals around, attention dynamics on the page, and, the general context and audience side characteristics and their proclivity to purchase and time of day and weather. Nothing for creative. Like there's just all these things where it's like, as an industry, we're all going to look back at it like a year or two from now and be like, wow.
Yeah. It is insane. And it's funny because it's been going on for a long time. It's not like this is, as you pointed out, it's 2017. And at what point did you start to realize, I think part of it is it's a hard thing to measure, right? So I think it's a lot easier to track a click or throw a pixel or, kind of have this plumbing in place to measure behavior. And the internet spoiled people a little bit. Like, I'm old enough to have done like, multivariate testing on web pages, and you can manipulate HTML and show different things. But in media, where it's a video or, something like that, it's a lot harder. So when did you sort of realize that AI when did you start to turn there? Like, this is hard. And then like, here's a way where we can scale this potentially using AI. When did that start to shift for you?
Yeah, I think it was the scale that created the opportunity, right? Because the thinking was kind of like, if you're just making a TV ad and you're going to run a bunch of money behind that single piece of creative, then you can afford to spend large dollars testing that in sort of slow, in-person panels and make like. But in a world where, a lot of our clients might have a few 100,000 million pieces of creative, that exist, in various forms, display ads, videos, vertical, or, in countless forms. Then you have to change the nature and of like how you test these things. It has to become scalable. And so it was almost kind of like seeing where the world was going led to this realization that like we have to make testing mechanisms and predictive signal that can be applied to every one of these atomized pieces of creative, so that they can kind of all be optimized, not just at the campaign level.
Right. Now that is interesting. And I think as kind of segues into the kind of definition of some of these things. So like, it's really hard to it's hard to quantify things in creative. And so like, and it's like, well, if I just told you to do this thing, people want the silver bullet, right? It's like, if you say the brand at this time and do this, then the ad will work. Well, define what work is. And then it's the other thing. So how do you kind of define creative intelligence for VidMob and for you? Like, what's your, everybody's got a different, it's like my family's tomato sauce. Like, everybody's got a different recipe for this. What is your like way of kind of viewing this?
Yeah. And I think if we think about, like tomato sauce is maybe a good analogy. There is, kind of like a maturity hierarchy of that. Like, so I'm a terrible cook, but like, I'm going to assume that like you absolutely need tomatoes in tomato sauce.
It's good. Baseline.
And there's probably, 3 or 4 other ingredients that are just like absolutely must-haves. And if you don't have them, like, don't even show up to the party.
Right.
But that's not going to get you to the finish line. And it's sort of the same thing. Like, so, first of all, is like there are core kind of like platform best practices that, you should do, on, Meta Reels versus Instagram stories versus TikTok. It's basically the equivalent of like having tomato sauce, having tomatoes or not.
Right, right.
You got to do those. And so that's like kind of what we think of as like the ground floor, like it's sort of adherence to the platform best practices. And actually Google sort of did a study of this where like looking at all of our clients and sort of essentially looking at, sort of adherence to their ABCDs. Doing that led to about a 32% lift in ROAS. But the problem with that is like, if everyone's using the exact same tomato sauce recipe, like the world gets pretty boring. Now you have very, very different brands. LVMH is very different than Geico. It's very different than Coca-Cola, et cetera. And so like the next ladder up on that is like understanding that my brand has bespoke, sort of, criteria. We can sort of, score again. You could determine those and then score against those. The third rung on the ladder is, okay, well, I have these various custom criteria, but some are more important than others. Like having a strong call to action and featuring our brand is actually more important than adhering to platform formats. And then what we think of as the last is dynamic, like sort of like a true, like kind of model based, sort of creative scoring, where it understands that there's actually interplay between these. You do need, a logo, but if you have sort of a celebrity, brand element, then maybe you don't need it. And so like they actually like, influence each other. And so what we're generally doing is working with clients and kind of bringing them up this kind of like maturity and intelligence curve. And effectively what happens is you end up with more and more accurate and more predictive, scores as you kind of go up.
Right. And do you feel like what's the cycle on that? So it's like, say you're figuring something out and it's like, well, in digital, right, you can kind of react maybe really quickly. Although you see a lot of people doing like the poor man's optimization where they're kind of using like, after the fact data to like, or no one really has the guts to run sometimes a lot of things, statistical significance or whatever. Are you kind of in your kind of universe, like, are you able to react to that quickly? Like when somebody's running a creative, or is a lot of it pre-market? Like for people listening to this, like where in the life cycle do you find the sweet spot, or do you just try to hit full funnel? Like what does that mean for you?
Yeah, I mean, you try and hit full funnel. I mean, and so that is really like the platform that we built is designed to be able to do this at scale with ease. And so, when we're working with sort of a large global marketer, they're going to be connecting probably thousands of different ad accounts all over the world. And it's just running 24/7, analyzing every single creative impression, updating the models, and scoring both pre-flight and in-flight every piece of creative. And then, the beauty of this is that what we call creative data, that creative data that's generated and built, which I think is now becoming a really important new kind of like first party data asset that every marketer simply has to own. That asset can be applied across the whole marketing workflows. It has, roles to play in and upfront, planning where it's influencing, style guides and brand toolkits and, shot lists and things, all the way up front. We can take that and deploy it via an API into Gen AI tools so that, sort of content that's being made is automatically being appended and enhanced via that sort of creative data asset you have. So you can type like "Bake Me a Coke ad for Germany," but it actually then, it knows a whole lot more to get to a better result. It can be applied into media decisioning. So what I mentioned before about like impressions having no creative signal or dollars being spent behind assets that have no chance of performing, like that just ends when you have like kind of predictive scores, ahead of time there. And then lastly, we can export that creative quality data at an asset or campaign level to measurement providers so that the measurement reporting that they're doing just becomes instantly more accurate because it can say, hey, we were telling you that platform X was actually a better platform and should be invested in more heavily, but actually it's just because you had terrible creative there.
Right, right.
The insight we had was completely wrong.
And does this work kind of everywhere? Like, is this like a global thing? Is this working just anywhere in the world or?
Everywhere. Yeah. So, our clients tend to be kind of, completely global marketers operating all over the world, sort of big scale. And it works also across like sort of the whole sort of like digital continuum. So our roots were in, walled garden, because that's kind of where the APIs were strongest in the beginning. And we pushed laterally into open web with DV360 and Amazon DSP. We're adding Trade Desk and Yahoo DSP in the next couple of weeks. then pushed into retail media with Amazon, and now, per the topic of this conversation, pushing into, CTV as well. So like the whole kind of
So
digital.
that was actually my next question. And so good segue. So yeah, what is the difference in your mind between like applying this to digital, traditional digital, let's call it, and CTV, right? Like, so what do you see, if I'm a brand and I'm looking at this, like I was doing this in digital and now like I'm trying to understand TV, there's probably some things that are very different, some things that might be similar. So what does that kind of look like?
Well, I think as the buying infrastructure for CTV starts to look more and more like digital, where everything is highly fluid and can be, manipulated, in real time, it really comes down to just kind of speed of signal, is what I would say.
Interesting.
So, if you think about on they just say, Meta and Google, you have hundreds of available KPIs, across the funnel from top to bottom, and they're all effectively instantaneous. And so you have really quick signal, a lot to work on and respond to, and can be like highly iterative. With TV, what we had to do is say, all right, well, we're going to break out of that kind of platform universe, and maybe we're looking through to brand data that's coming from other measurement providers, or maybe we're looking through to sales, through whomever's, whether it's kind of real-time sales data or an MMM or something like that. And so you end up with basically more complex modeling, but ultimately getting to the same point, which is a scalable framework to score, content against the attributes that drive performance.
Interesting. Yeah. And it's a different paradigm on some level, but if it's purchased similarly, I think it can function similarly. So the curiosity like around the content itself. So like, how do you see like something that's, because time is such a factor in these things, like a 30-second TV ad versus a 15-second TV ad versus obviously like a digital ad that might be flat. Like, how do you see that factor into attention and how people might perceive creative, and how does that play into your model?
Yeah, I mean, it matters in a big way, right? And like how people, I think about one of probably the simplest things we ever do, but still incredibly important, is that on a lot of the digital content where you have pretty rapid drop-off rates, we have what we call kind of like a watch dashboard, which shows you like the number of, people that are still left at any point in an ad. And then as you go down, you see the various like elements that exist in the ad. We were having a meeting recently with a large telecom company, just going through ad by ad and seeing that in each case, and this was a consideration campaign. So like the actual offer was like the point of the campaign. In each case, when the offer actually came in, it was like between 1% and 3% of the audience left. And so for the other like 97 to 99%, they were just seeing like kind of unbranded films about New York City. And so when you just think about it, you're like, like you could see this marketers like, like head kind of exploded, like, oh my God, like, but first of all, on the bad side, like we're wasting 99% of our money. Second of all, on the good side, wow, we can get like 99x more brand effectiveness by doing something really simple, just moving our offer up. But in a different environment, like maybe TV, where you have different kind of engagement and attention, then you have the opportunity to do more, storytelling, build along, and kind of, so I think it is really understanding the medium, the nature, and being able to assess this and make sure that you have the right content in the right place, because you can waste an awful lot of money basically doing like a solid. Like this is probably very good for like New York City tourism.
Right.
It just wasn't good at all for the phone carrier.
Right. No, it's always in those situations, and you're calling somebody's baby ugly by telling them they did it, and then how do they respond to it? Which is kind of a segue into, all right, so like just, I think sometimes, people listening to this or watching on YouTube, which is what people do with podcasts. We're on YouTube and no one's got the screen on. This is probably the most likely. What's the quintessential like case study? I know I saw one that you posted recently on LinkedIn that was really cool. I don't know if that's the best one, but give us the kind of, the story of a brand who had success with you and kind of what that felt like and what it was like to what they got out of it, basically.
Yeah, so that was actually so that was Kalanova.
Kalanova, yeah. That looked really cool for what it's worth. So if
it was.
Anybody listening hasn't seen that, they should check that case study out. That's a good case study.
Thank you. I mean, it really was like, first of all, they're awesome. Like, so, Charisse Hughes, who's, their their CMO is amazing. Nicole Vincent, their VP of marketing, like just a great team. And also like, people who like leaned in early on creative data and just like, that sort of second one were like, yep, that makes sense. Like creative is important. If you can give us data to get better at it, that's going to make us better everywhere. Let's do this. So, the idea was I'm on the board of the data media board for the MMA, which is sort of an industry trade body. And they're always looking for research that they can do to basically help CMOs, kind of get better at their jobs. And what they saw was a bunch of questions from their member body around how kind of like AI-based predictive scores can be used to drive business impact. Was sort of like the general call to action. And so we already had this relationship with Kalanova, and they raised their hand and said, hey, we'd be happy to do this. So basically, it was like looking at work we're doing with them, and then having the MMA kind of validate the research and provide sort of the methodology. What we found was that, and we sort of broke it out across there too. So not just going down to like category of best practices, but looking at across like salty snacks and sweet snacks. They had different criteria that were drivers of performance, and we built sort of custom models for each. And then when we scored all their content against these custom models and used that to drive media allocation, et cetera, the net was it ended up leading to about an 11% increase in their profit ROI. It just created performance that it was able to fund like their entire transformation agenda. And now they're at a point where basically every piece of content that they make is scored. It drives like internal compensation schemes. It's how they grade their agencies. Like it is now like part of the fabric of how they work. And so Charisse actually presented this work to a couple hundred CMOs at the annual summit, and then we did like the white paper that you're talking about. But really exciting stuff. Something that we see consistently with really all of our clients. Like it's probably not that surprising. Like if you have something that's 50 to 70% of results, and you're not really bringing any science to it, like it's not that surprising when you do bring some science to it, like you can actually drive a lot of improvement.
Yeah. And there's a lot of wood to chop in that arena. And it's a question for you, just like on the business side. So it's amazing how much the person can make a difference at an organization, or there's like a corporate culture around being data driven. And how do you feel like it? Obviously, I've been doing, for those of you only listening, I have gray hair. So it's like I've been doing this since like 2001 or whatever. So like, it's like some people just don't want data. Some people embrace being data driven. It can be an individual or a culture. But now we have this extra thing that's compounding it, which is AI. Right? So not only do I have to potentially get involved in testing my creative and getting these results, and then now there's this AI element on it that like people could be just have like xenophobia about AI. I'm just afraid AI is going to take over the world or steal all my information or who knows what else, which is, it might. But so how do you feel that plays a role? Because you're doing both. You're measuring creative and you're bringing this AI in, but you found somebody at Kalanova that was bought in, and that can change a culture and become part of the fabric, as you said. How much headwind do you see there? And what do you think the next couple of years looks like?
Yeah, it's a great question. And what I would say is AI is making our conversations a lot easier. And then I think I would actually add to that creator and sort of influencer content is also a big factor. And so the reason I kind of lump them together is that both are kind of creating this element where it's really easy to get a lot of content. We just did an analysis for one of our beauty customers of like 150,000 creator assets. Like that's like the volume of stuff that they have out there, like, in like a relatively short period of time.
Great data set when you can get that kind of volume.
Oh yeah. And
are you plugging into to like Instagram and TikTok and these things, or?
Yeah. So we can just, sort of get all those assets and run them through our analysis. And so the first part is just helping them understand like what's in this content. Like they have no idea. And like the spend behind this is massive, right? For some companies now they're spending, almost as much, if not more, on influencer and creator content than they are on sort of like traditionally produced content. So understanding what's going on in there, same sort of engagement dynamics, like you don't just spend to have, you might have a lot of engagement, a lot of views, someone watching something for 60 seconds, but like if they don't actually show the product or engage with it until like a minute 30, like, was that actually a good dollar spent? So, and understanding that, like, because I've had a number of conversations with CMOs where they're like, we know that this creator content drives performance, So we have to do it. But we're also kind of worried that it's at best not helping drive brand at all. And at worst, it's actually fracturing and damaging our brand. Because when we look at our competitors' influencer content, it looks the exact same. And so they're like, how do we understand, like, are our distinctive brand assets being used appropriately? And how do we build consistency, and et cetera, et cetera. The reason I lump that in with AI is the result of both is like tons of content. And, that's what kind of creates this challenge, right? Like, I think we are very clearly either already in or will soon be in the world of like infinite content. And you could probably, I don't know if this is a swearing podcast, but I call it like infinite shit. We're going to have like, it's like,
They're just go in, all in. We got it.
I mean, like, we are definitely very quickly, and maybe we're already there, just going to have like literally infinite garbage.
I think we might be close.
I just saw a demo like at the actual MMA summit of like synthetic influencer content where it's like literally not a real person, looks like a real person, but it's like, and so when now all of that influencer creator content is just like fake, like, yeah, anyway, like infinite garbage. So the question is, like, in that, if a marketer is using the same AI tooling as all of their competitors, like everyone's using VO3 or ChatGPT, or like whatever the tooling they're using, the goal is not to make stuff. Like, that's not the marketing charter. The goal is to win share and drive your business better than your competitors and grow. And when we look at it, like, our point of view is basically like, there's 3 pillars of value in AI. Compute, NVIDIA, algorithms, Anthropic, OpenAI, et cetera, and data. And like, people aren't going to be building their own algorithms, and they're not making their own chips. So data is like how, McDonald's is going to be Burger King or vice versa. And I think that's where this all gets really, really interesting. And that's where, sort of like, to your original question, like, the conversations are starting to get really easy, where people are like, yep, like, we need to build this data asset, because otherwise we know we're going to lose.
And your passion about it is contagious. I think you're on the right track there. And these things happen fast. Like, in the way people measure the creative that worked for you yesterday might not work for you tomorrow. So there's that. And then just like the way you looked at information yesterday, is going to evolve. And we're in a period of rapid innovation, whether we want to admit it or not. And that's an exciting time. So last thing I'll ask you, kind of on that line of thinking, is, what's the most exciting thing for you? So if I'm looking at VidMob and I'm looking at Alex, it's like, what coming down the pipe for you, in any time frame? People always have to ask the obligatory, what do you see in the future question. But like, just for you, like, what's exciting for you? What are things that you're kind of looking forward to for VidMob and for you that we can kind of get excited about as well?
Yeah, I think, like, for VidMob, the things that we're really excited about now are sort of like moving from an era of sort of like showing data to an era of connecting data. Where, again, I think of it as like, for a while, what we were doing was basically providing sort of creative insights that enabled people to make smarter decisions, generally through human systems, understand more about their brands. And that was really impactful. But now, I mentioned sort of how bidding happens in the world, and measurement, like the idea of just basically, hey, I've turned on this creative data, tooling. It's learning every day about like culture and how people respond to different things. It's grading my content against that on a predictive basis. And I don't know how it worked, but all of a sudden YouTube's just 32% better.
Right.
Like that idea of kind of like automated value achievement. The same on the Gen AI. It's like, we rolled out this API connection, and I'm not sure what happened, but all of a sudden Adobe Firefly is just like literally making great stuff, whereas a week ago it wasn't. That, I think, is where we get really excited now, where it's sort of like building into the fabric of things, and having basically, like, anyone that sort of is building this, just like their lives are better and easier, and their results are better.
Awesome. Well, thank you for coming on the podcast today. This has been exciting. I think creative itself is just such a rich topic. And I have 10 more questions I want to ask you that we don't have time for. And so I think, like, we may have to have you back for a part 2. But I think that, this is an exciting time. I think if you're listening to this, Alex, real quick, where can people find you? What's the best way to get in touch with VidMob?
Yeah, so VidMob, vidmob.com. We're on all the socials. LinkedIn's a great place to reach us. I'm at Colmerica on Twitter. I tend to like weigh in on things occasionally, although maybe less recently. But yeah, anyone that's interested in talking about kind of how creative data can make them a better, smarter, more effective, and more efficient marketer, like, please reach out. We would love to chat.
No, I definitely will be taking you up on that. This has been a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much, Alex.
Yeah, thank you, Scott.